What is the? I still don't get the show. Help me understand what this means.
Yeah, Adam, what does that even? I forgot he was in here. He doesn't know what it means.
Okay, Boots is here. Okay, I'm going to set up the mics real quick. We're gonna have a with Boots and Boots Riley and Caroline Kwan. Okay, hold on. Hold on. Yeah. I wanted to. Wait.
Are we live?
Oh yeah, we've been live. Yeah. All right, Boots Riley in the building, Caroline Kwan in the building, ladies and gentlemen. What an honor to have you here. Director, communist extraordinaire, someone that you have probably seen the works of, hopefully. I Love Boosters just came out. We're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about your experiences, your politics, your worldview.
Your music.
And your music as well. We got it right here. I already had it ready to go, ready to rip.
Okay.
The Coup, 5 million ways to kill a CEO.
Okay, one thing I will say about this, we can play it. But the guy that made this, I didn't make this video. And there's a thing he does and the reason why I've never shared this, but you know, since people want to hear it, that's fine, is that he does a thing on the picture where it says, ugly is even skin deeper. He shows Africans. And I was like, he made this like 20 years ago, and I messaged him. I was like, take that out and I'll share the video, and he never would. And
okay,
so
let me move a little bit.
Video.
Move a little bit to our right so that we can make this an angle work. Sorry, this is a little scrunched up.
Here, I'll scoot.
Okay, that's good to know. Are not necessarily those of.
And if you
I
see
feel that.
my old pictures, my hair was a big part of it. And matter of fact, afros are seeming like they're like a regular thing. But when we first came out, the Coup in 1993, nationally, people were like, why the fuck is your hair like that? Matter of fact, we used to have a song. We had a song called Fuck a Perm. And because everybody would see me and say you should perm your hair. So we had this song called Fuck a Perm. And when we were touring in 93, we knew as soon as we hit the stage, because we were opening up for like Scarface and, various folks. And we knew somebody was going to be like, man, what the fuck is your hair? And they'd be like, cut your hair. And so we'd wait for that point where somebody said it and we'd be like, what did you say? And we let them say it into the mic, and then they chicka chicka. And we go into this song called Fuck a Perm, and it always worked. It always blew the crowd away. But that's how it was different. And then people, then it, because you might think, oh, they had them in the 70s, but when you're like 20 in 1993 or in your early 20s, that is so long ago. So my hair was so much a part of my identity, and then my face started changing. So I was like, damn, what do I do? And then last year I retired them. I was like, no, fuck it. I'm gonna just get used to whatever is the changing nature of my head and all that. But then I had to sell the movie. I was like, let me put these hats back.
I think you should own the big hats as opposed to Pharrell, who is a friend of the IDF, from what I understand.
Oh, damn. Yeah.
Oh, people don't know that. Anyway, Boots Riley, thank you so much for coming on. I've been a longtime fan of your work and a sympathetic ideologue to your worldview.
Oh, thank you.
I love that moment where I think it's Amy Goodman that says, like, you're a, what did she say? She says you're like a socialist.
You're an she says you're an anti-capitalist.
Yeah.
And anti-capitalist is a way for one, at the very least, to not talk about what the world is that we want to create, but two, to kind of just be like, I'm against people buying stuff from corporations or something like that, which is more can be very, very liberal. And sometimes it's just anarchists being like, also suffering from some of the anti-communism that we've been fed as we grow up. So they don't want to say communist, so they want to say anti-capitalist, but it leaves the door open for all sorts of shenanigans.
But you've been a communist since 15. Like an avowed communist. You do not shy away from the label.
I joined, and let me be specific, because now I would say communist with a little c, but I was communist with a big C because I joined an actual party, which is what is actually going to be necessary for us to make a revolution, is for there to be parties. And I was in a party called Progressive Labor Party. I joined when I was 15. And so I kind of had this same goal in my life. And at a certain point, I decided that wasn't the route for me to get there, was that particular party. But yeah.
Yeah. Great. I mean, I admire your courage, even though it shouldn't be courageous to say the truth. But unfortunately, that's what it takes sometimes in a country like the United States, especially the heart of empire, to stand boldly and proudly and continue making art. I wanted to talk to you about agitated propaganda, because in many respects, that's precisely what I try to do as well, in a very different format. Obviously, it's not an artistic expression usually. There is a performance element to it, to what I do as well. But I think one of the issues that I see, one of the major problems that I see in America, is that the American working class lacks class consciousness. And that is by design. It's a design of the system, obviously. And it is a war that the capital-owning class has waged, and quite successfully, if I may myself. And I think that art plays a formative role in agitated propaganda. Do you also agree? Do you feel like
that's
your
the
lives
reason
work?
I'll put it like this. I was an organizer, and when I started to see how art could be used, that's when I decided to do art. I wasn't like, I want to be an artist and what could I talk about? You know, it was only because of that. And you know, and so that direction, and also it came from me seeing how much culture actually affects how people see how the world is made, how people think they are in relationship to the economic system we're in. I had a point where after we made our first 2 albums, because when I went into it, I was like, we're gonna do 2 albums, we're gonna go multi-platinum, and then I'm gonna spend that money on revolutionary headquarters around the world or whatever. Well, we didn't go close to platinum. And we had
How to Kill Your Landlord.
yeah. But here's the thing, and you know, the thing is that the art and even the ideas that I express are ones that I was seeing that people liked and people were attached onto. And I've had many, what you see that I've done is in the face of a lot of people working against me, right? But there's contradictions where, there'll be somebody at a radio station that loves the music, but then they're told by someone else, oh, we're not playing that, right? And there's been all of those things where people come to me years later and say, hey, your song was the most requested song on our station, and they just wouldn't play it. So I think I naively was like, well, people are gonna like it, it's gonna grow. And so our first album was Kill My Landlord, our second album was Genocide and Juice, and we had this song off Genocide and Juice called Fat Cats and Bigger Fish. And Fat Cats and Bigger Fish was as much of a hit as we could have had. It was, somebody snuck it onto the radio late night. This girl, Mona Lisa Murray, she knew some folks. Big Boy at Power 106 put it on, and then it was just getting requested and playing all day in LA and in Chicago. And in LA and Chicago, it was selling 5,000 copies a week because of the radio play. Now, often when they do radio play, it doesn't have that sort of traction. And so record labels, other people were telling me, oh, that's the platinum formula. If you can do that, you just duplicate that other ways. That's what EMI is going to do. We were on EMI Records. Anyway, EMI bought the record whole hog from the indie they were working with, Wild Pitch. And we got excited. We like, they bought it. They bought the second half. They were 50-50 partners. They bought it. So, and we're doing well on the radio. So obviously they're about to take it wide. And they bought it. And the next week they were like, we're not working it. So I got depressed. I was like,
So they bought it to kill it.
They bought it to kill it. And so I was like, damn, what am I doing? At that point, I was 24. And I was like, I've been wasting my whole life being an artist. Like, what am I doing? And I stopped, and we made an organization called the Young Comrades, which was a Black organization organizing in the Black community, but with a class analysis, right? And with the idea of getting that out there. And that imploded for various reasons after a few years. But during that time, that's when I worked telemarketing, because I knew I was good at that, and I could do that one day every 2 weeks. And, I didn't have kids yet, so we were doing that. And then but my point is, I'm sorry, long way around to saying, while we were doing that organization, is when I especially saw what I had left behind, that people were joining or not joining campaigns, sometimes based on a song lyric or something they saw in a movie or something like that, because people are taking in information all the time. That's for most people, that's their literature, right?
Wasn't there that group in Baltimore that saw Sorry to Bother You and then
Oh yeah, so many years later. So with Sorry to Bother You, I during this big strike wave that there was a strike wave from 2020 to 2024, depending on when you want to count it. That was measurably the largest strike wave in U.S. history since the 70s, with thousands of work stoppages and strikes, and not necessarily through the known unions. Yeah.
It was. There were wildcat strikes in like Oklahoma, for example, that were not like sanctioned technically. It was an explosion born out of the material conditions that people were saying enough is enough. Like, we have to do something about it, and they had just demands.
Yeah, and a place that tracks that people can go look is paydayreport.com. They were keeping track of that, and so during that time, I was getting dozens of messages where people were like, some version of this. Like, we didn't think we were going to be able to organize this workplace in order to have a strike, or B, form a union, something like that. And so many stories where they're like, but we played everybody Sorry to Bother You. And then they were willing to have a strike or have a union. And then one specific anecdote was in Baltimore. There was a couple people came and told me when I went there, that they had a 60-person workplace, and they were going to do a show of hands vote on whether to have a union or not. And they thought they were going to win, but they thought it was going to be by the skin of their teeth. They had organized pushback, and they said when everybody was supposed to show their hands to say whether they wanted a union or not, to say yay, somebody in the middle of the crowd yelled, "Equisapiens, let's be out." And then everybody laughed, and every single person raised their hand. And so those organizers were like, wow, in that case, they hadn't played it for them, but everybody laughed because they knew the movie,
So for those who don't know, Sorry to Bother You was your directorial debut in
Yeah.
2018, starring Lakeith Stanfield.
Mm-hmm.
And I read a story about how you got the script to him. This is after he had done Get Out. Social commentary was really big in horror. He was on the rise. And him, getting him to be a part of your film, which you come into Hollywood, which I would love to talk about your experience as one of the few self-avowed communists. Like, you do not shy away from that label. You proudly bear that label.
Yeah.
Trying to get a film made that is a radical critique of the capitalist system, but also with your very, idiosyncratic style. You love surrealism.
Yeah.
You love dark comedy. So, what can you talk about that process?
Yeah, well,
transitioning
I
to
say
making films.
Overall, in hindsight, this is what I can say. A lot of people, one, there's contradictions within all spaces, right? The movie talks about that, right? But the latest movie. But so here's a story I like to tell. That's not necessarily my story to tell, but I know it. So Rage Against the Machine, they were going to do a music video for Sleep Now in the Fire. And it was going to be directed by Michael Moore. Their whole idea was, hey, we're going to go on Wall Street, play loud, get arrested, and that's going to be the music video. So they go, they play once, nothing happens, some security doors close, they play again, and people are kind of looking, nothing's happening. The third time they start playing, they start hearing this noise that goes, rah, 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 rah. They don't know what it is, it's just getting louder. So they play the fourth time and it's getting louder. Rah, 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 rah. And then 3 blocks away, coming from around the corner, they see a horde of people in business suits coming toward them. And they're the ones that are going, rah, rah, rah. And they're getting closer and closer. And as they get closer, they're still playing. As they get closer, they can tell what that noise is. It's that horde of people in business suits who obviously work on Wall Street saying, "Suits for rage, suits for rage." And there's that contradiction. They're saying it in the thing. They're saying, we're suits, we work on Wall Street, we like what Rage Against the Machine is saying. And I think that has to do with, in general, that most people in the world, and even in the United States, wish that the world was different. They want the world to be different. They and if you told them the ideas of communism, which I often will sum up in general as the people having democratic control over the wealth that they create with their labor, right? And real democratic control. So if you told them those ideas, most people would be like, I'm down with that. But also most people, because they have not seen a movement, they don't know what the plan is, they would be like, I don't think that can happen. I would like there to be a different thing, but I don't think that can happen. And they're like, plus I went to school and now I got to get a job.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I'm in the machine, so I just have to keep following.
And so there's a lot of people, and then there's other people that are even more naively in that machine where they're like, oh, it's just a marketplace of ideas and blah, blah, blah. So there's all sorts of things. And then you have the hardcore ideologues that are like, fuck that, stop this. So at that point when Sorry to Bother You was getting made, I think the politics, because a lot of people didn't know the difference between a strike and a protest. I think there were people that on the outside that mistook the politic for being liberal. And so it was granted a little bit of grace in certain ways. And then there were people on the inside that were telling me the same way, like, oh, I'm really a radical. I just have this job. I blah, 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 did this in college. I blah, blah, blah. And luckily now because usually, there would be like, luckily now I can work on something I believe in. So we had that combination of things going on. And at the same time, when I wrote the movie, when I wrote the movie, Obama was in office. When the movie got made, Trump was in office. So there was this idea of like, oh, we need like, quote unquote, protest movies. So all of that combined with the fact that most people that read the script also got distracted by the horse dicks.
Which, yeah, fair.
And so that was the most, that was the talk. Like nobody like the horse dicks, then there's strikes and radical resistance. So like that was just more explosive and, and so that it kind of got in there, it got in the world. And we actually didn't have as much pushback against that as we do with this one.
Do you feel like surrealism aids in maybe sheltering that message a little bit, not dampening it in any way, but allows big production houses to be more comfortable with a much more radical message? And I would say that in Sorry to Bother You, it was very apparent what the overarching message was, and I think it is. Very apparent in I Love Boosters as well. Do you feel like this is your artistic direction, or is there any tactical necessity for using this package?
I don't think the ideas are snuck in this, like like
it's
this,
not.
But what I will say is that our first album, Kill My Landlord, was kind of a pamphlet on tape, right? It was not the fact that the ideas were way out, but it was what I thought was important for people to hear. I thought certain words were important for people to hear. But what I learned by the time I got to Genocide and Choose is to make more emotional connection with this emotional thing you're striving for. Like, realizing that when people hear a song talking about, oh, I got all this money and I'm blah, 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 this, sometimes they don't believe it. But even when they do believe it, what they're hearing is this person is free. This person doesn't have to worry about being homeless. I want that. And that listener has not come into contact with the movement. And that's Radical's fault, right, for that. But so what I realized is that I started realizing, okay, I need to connect my emotional connection I need to draw a line from my emotional, personal connection to my idea of how the world works. And that is, and over the course of 30 years, I honed that to the point where, it comes into certain aesthetic choices. But it's not really about sneaking it in. It's more about having people experience that emotional road, that emotional trip to get to a certain idea.
I saw Boosters in theaters. I brought a friend who I knew she wasn't familiar with your work, and I didn't tell her anything. So I just kind of wanted to gauge her response, and the film opens up and it's so colorful and zany. It's very Looney Tunes style energy, and I could just see her sitting there like, oh my god, what am I watching? But then staying along for the ride.
What about the moment? Now, I don't want to spoil anything for people who haven't seen it, but there's a moment that is quite impactful. It's almost like the horse stick of this movie.
Yeah.
How did your friend react, if you don't mind me asking?
I mean, laughed and also kind of just went, is this really happening on screen? Because there's so, there's so much that you put into your films. And I think audiences have gotten used to watching a lot of the same repetition. And I think there's, this whole relationship of like, how do we get people into theaters? We'll give them something worth seeing, give them something exciting, innovative, original. So even if you don't necessarily like everything, or if, it's a little confusing, it's still engaging. It's still, it's something that you haven't seen before, and certainly not in today's landscape. So at the end of the viewing, I was like, what did you think? And she goes, it was awesome. And also then she was asking me some more questions about like dialectical materialism, which, let me just say, having Isa Gonzalez chain smoking a vape with her like 90s style thin eyebrows, giving a speech on dialectical materialism is so awesome. And it's such a great way for people like my friend and others who they're not going to go watch like a professor talking about it. They're not going to go necessarily read Marx to start off with. So that's their introduction in this film that is so joyous and colorful. And I think that's something about your work is that it's not, I think it's easy to lean into cynicism, especially as we are looking at this world and trying to push for change. Like, it's easy to get cynical, but I think with you, there's such a radical optimism, and especially Boosters. I felt like that was your most joyous work, because I've seen Virgo as well.
I think
I'm a Virgo.
So what I did when I was 15, what I was doing, what made me join the Progressive Labor Party was they had a program with the Anti-Racist Farm Workers Union in McFarland and Delano, California, Central California Valley, where we were organizing farm workers. It was a group that had broken off from Cesar Chavez because they were communists, and they formed their own union. And I went as a teenager to help them, and they were they had been students in 1968 in Mexico who had left to save their lives, but didn't want to just become professors. They wanted to carry on the revolution, and so they went to they went to Central California and started this thing. But the point is that through that, they weren't just talking about organizing at this one ranch or organizing even the whole valley. They were talking about that in connection with how this sort of a movement can build and spread and become the class struggle, the class conflict that we need in order to actually make a revolution. So also during that, I realized that you could come and scare people about everything that's going on, talk about how fucked up everything is, and people will get mad, but that doesn't make them want to do anything. That makes them feel righteous in not doing anything sometimes. And what I understood early on was that people need to be able to see a way to win in order to get involved with stuff. That optimism and real optimism, not just like everything's gonna be okay, one day we will prevail, blah, 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 but something connected to, and that has to do organizational wise, that has to do with engaging in winnable campaigns, engaging in but not just leaving them at reforms, engaging in winnable campaigns in the context of saying this is part of a step of how we get to a revolutionary movement. There has to be a radical vision and an idea of how this is, because otherwise you just do those winnable campaigns and it just turns into reform after reform, and you get burnt out. So people do get burnt out on those reform movements. They do get burnt out even when they feel that they're radical, and they're showing up at demonstration after demonstration And we've lied to them many times. Radicals and radical organizations unconsciously lie to people because we've been, since the beginning of the New Left, saying we took it from demonstrations used to be whole industry workforces coming out. You know, here are all the miners. They're basically demonstrating that they could shut this industry down.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the 60s, and I won't go through my whole spiel on that, it turned into the demonstration being the be-all, end-all, and it being about spectacle. And so definitely things that I'd been a part of in the 80s, 90s, and even early 2000s were like, let's get a bunch of people on the street and then it'll, and now don't get me wrong, spectacle is necessary for people to see that other people agree with them. But without a plan, people just get burnt out. People are like, damn, for the against the Iraq war, we had 10 million people in the street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? It didn't do a damn thing.
But
because we didn't have a mass militant radical labor movement that could shut down industry.
I think that's the most important aspect of this is that obviously it takes all fronts to develop a mass movement. You do need to protest. Yeah, but then you also need labor. You need labor militancy, and you also, I mean, you even need some semblance of even like the electoral route within the bourgeois democracy that a lot of people I think cast aside as like neutering these sorts of movements, and I understand that argument, of course, but it doesn't hurt to have people that are in the halls of power that can at least ease up the tension. It's not the end all be all, and I never think it is. But one thing that we're working on, or at least I've been working on now, and maybe you'll disagree with me on this, is by way of the Democratic Socialists of America trying to elect anti-Zionists into positions of power. Not to say that will that their radicalism won't get effectively neutered in the process, but at least trying to have like some workings of a movement within the halls of power, and then using the platform of elections to at least spread the messages far and wide. Mm-hmm. Because I think regardless of my criticisms of Bernie Sanders, his 2016 electoral run, this insurgent campaign that he launched against Hillary Clinton, exposed this dynamic between Democrats that were very clearly invested in the continuation of neoliberalism and not any different than the Republican Party was when it came to material changes, versus a Democrat that did not shy away from the moniker of socialism, which I think restarted or created a resurgence of a socialist movement that went far beyond what Bernie Sanders was advocating for.
Yeah, I would say this, that definitely there's times in my life where I was like, and I do still believe this, but just to that I think it's all about the energy of the folks involved. Like sometimes what we would go through is this cycle where we're building this movement, and at one point, let's talk the early 2000s, you have this anti-war movement that built up, and people were getting to a place like, what do we do, and considering, shutdowns, things like that, and then an election would come up. We got to get Kerry in, things like that, and then people would be lying. Radicals that I knew were lying to people, saying Kerry was anti-war, and saying because they just had to do it to get Bush out. So, but the point is that all this energy, those movements turned into just electoral movements. And the thing that was interesting to me is that I don't remember which campaign it was that where I did say that people should vote for Bernie. It must have been the 2020, yeah. And that was because I talked to some folks in the campaign, and the whole idea was to call for as a way to fight to get Medicare for all, was going to have to be from those platforms, from a presidential platform, to call for people to strike and shut down the areas of folks that weren't that that weren't going along with it. So I thought of it as a way to heighten the conflict. And what I would say is this, is that I think that in some cases it can be pulling energy away from the radical militant labor movement that we want. But sometimes there could be a way for it to help out, such as the getting rid of some, Taft-Hartley, things like that.
Yeah.
Those could be ways that could open up. The thing that I think would need to be how it would need to be put out is a thing that doesn't say, because the problem with elections sometimes is you say, this is the answer. Let's get our thing I've seen even radical organizations do stuff, and so I'm a little bit more open to that. But what I will say is that the only way for that to really be able to be things to be in tandem with each other is with an actual party, with an actual revolutionary party. And I do see that there are inside the DSA, there's more radical sections than others. But I think that we also, we need parties. We need people that are dedicated to figuring out this as a strategy, and that being part of a larger strategy. And if the primacy of organizing that mass militant radical labor movement can be out there, then even those politicians can have a little bit more power to do those things.
Yeah, I'm not I don't think voting for Kamala Harris or voting for Joe Biden over Donald Trump is somehow going to make it easier to organize. I don't believe that at all. As a matter of fact, we've seen that the contradictions heighten when you have reactionary politicians. It's just that my assessment of the situation is that if you do have someone who is unafraid of calling themselves a socialist and actually abides by real socialist values, real socialist principles, the electoral route is it's basically flipping the script and using elections as a way to reach a mass movement, using the viability and the legitimacy under bourgeois democracy to reach the masses and maybe foment some kind of class consciousness, understanding that it's not the end all be all. As a matter of fact, it's not even the most consequential aspect of organizing.
Well, and since you talk about fomenting class consciousness, I think that sometimes electoral politics is the thing that confuses people on class consciousness, on a class analysis, because the question is how does power work, right?
Yeah.
And how do we express our power? And like you said, the main way that the working class is going to be able to express their power, you didn't say this, but I think you were going there, is through withholding labor and through being able to shut down sections of industry, whole industries, in order for us to get there. I think often what's sold to us is in order to even win the election, you've got to get a lot of people often to say that this is a game changer. This guy's a game changer. And so therefore I gotta, like that. And it becomes a letdown afterward, because people have been spending that time not doing not organizing on their job or anything like that. But if you're saying that there's a way to do both, then I'm all game for that.
That's my method of change, and this is controversial amongst many leftists as well, who will routinely criticize me and say that I'm dampening revolutionary potential, and I'm an impediment to more revolutionary politics.
Which I think I've seen criticisms of your work where people complain it's not revolutionary enough. Similar with Hasan, where they're like, he's not leftist enough. But the idea, I think, is that having this funnel where Hasan is not the revolution. Art, no matter how radical it is not the revolution itself. But I think there's the purpose of inspiring that collective action of like appealing to a wide audience, to the mainstream, to inspire that organizing and that collectivism.
Now, here's what I always say is like, if you do have a mass militant radical labor movement, it doesn't matter who's in office. You can make them do whatever you want. So that's why that's primary to create, because, so for instance, you know, obviously you've talked about the port shutdowns, the general strike, if you will, in Italy, right? Mm-hmm. That was, and now, however small the victory was there, that was somebody that was, you know, as right-wing as Trump, being forced to at least send a naval ship out to pretend to protect the flotilla to Gaza. Now, there's a, you know, if you just had a you know, radical politician in there, without that movement, you wouldn't be able to get anything happening like that. And also, but also, you could have a right-wing politician in there and have that movement, and you can make, you know, whatever happens.
They have to be responsive to this pressure, and the most powerful tool that labor has, that regular folk have, is their power to withhold their labor.
Yeah.
I've said jokingly earlier today that there's a Strait of Hormuz everywhere for those with eyes to see.
I said that, man.
Oh, you said that too?
Yeah.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's dope. I didn't. Well, but that was.
Well, we both said it.
Well,
Yeah.
here's because like what Iran was capable of doing, and now that there's this MOU being signed, we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
Obviously, Israel's
like it
probably
wasn't artillery shells that gave the U.S. pause. It was stopping the cash flow.
Yes. And it exposes the fragility of this international design, because capitalism requires a hegemonic superpower to keep everything as stable as possible. Although that stability is obviously very unstable for those who live in the periphery, and even the working class that we would consider living in the heart of empires, the labor aristocracy. No one is actually getting a good deal out of this bargain, with the exception of parasitic capital, international capital, and they are the ones who are benefiting from this. And I think, I try to use moments like this for agitated propaganda to show that, like, yeah, Iran didn't win this battle because they were capable of defeating the mightiest force that anyone's ever seen, the U.S. military. They were not capable of defeating the United States militarily, but they were capable of doing something much more powerful, which is to harm the centers of profit.
Yeah.
And you know, take punish international capital whenever the American or Israeli forces were to strike deep into Iran, hit a bank. They would turn around and say, we're going to start striking American banks in Saudi Arabia or in the United Arab Emirates. And I think that was what really accelerated this process. And, you know, obviously stopping the transiting of all oil and gas from the Strait of Hormuz, which is 20% of the world's energy, forced a lot of these countries to tap into their strategic reserves. And they were almost about to run out at this point.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's the thing. We haven't, and those are the kinds of ideas when you say that, like when you point out that Strait of Hormuz being blocked is what, you know, gave the U.S. pause, and that we could do that same thing. People see that as a possibility. When with Occupy Oakland, for instance, a lot of people, when they hear about the Occupy movement, they hear about New York and stuff. But Occupy Oakland was a little different in the sense that it was started by radicals. Like, they saw what was happening in New York. They were like, let's do something here using that same name. And so there was a general strike called for, and it wasn't a real general strike, but because that idea was put out there and there was a week to do it, and it was put out there in a huge way, a lot more, I saw a lot more people out at that than I had seen at anything before, because they thought it was a way to win. So we had 50,000 people, gather in a week. After calling for it in a week, 50,000 people gathered under the banner of death to capitalism because they thought that shutting down the city actually could get some power. Now, it was a one-day thing. It was symbolic. It wasn't going to get a win, but it was something that seeded an idea in people's heads. And we're seeing that with, obviously, with what happened in Minneapolis. So now, to the electoral thing, if what you're telling me is that, so I look at it back, I go backwards, okay? What we need is a world in which the people democratically control the wealth that we create with our labor. Now, that's going to take, which is communism. And that's going to take a certain kind of struggle in order to get there. Now, what we know from the USSR and even Cuba is that they had to have massive strikes. It was not only part of how they won, but it was part of how the working class was able to be educated and able to participate. And so for folks that don't, there were tens of millions of people involved in strikes in the USSR from the early 1900s to 1917. A lot of people don't talk about in Cuba. It wasn't just Fidel and Che and them coming in. There was a general strike happening.
There were also there were communist groups in Havana that were participating in sequence with general strikes.
Yeah.
Even though obviously there was the militancy aspect of it from the 13 that remained.
Yeah.
It takes every force, in my opinion. Everyone has a role to play in this process.
And all of those things where, like, sometimes people will break down revolutions and be like, this person was, to the right of that person. They were both all radical, but it took all of that in order to make a mass movement. And I think there's ways to do it more strategically and more in line. But if we're talking about getting, hundreds of millions of people involved in something, then, far be it from me to be like, I might say that that's not where I want to put my energy, but I'm not going to be like, that's not, and especially at this point, because right now, there's a lot of, I'll tell you what, like when I became a communist when I was 15, there were very few in the United States. And it's such a good thing to see that now there's, like, if you look online, I don't know, maybe there's millions, but I don't know. People that call themselves that. But what we don't have are parties and organizations that people are in. They're just kind of like, I subscribe to that idea, and they're maybe in their house by themselves and not connecting. And so we need things for people to get involved in. We need and winnable things, winnable actions for folks to get involved.
Well, I think
I do have to ask you this question. Sorry to cut you off, but what do you think about Zoran?
So here's the thing, and this goes with, and I haven't been following, honestly, I haven't been following what's happened since he got elected, because I've been in this cave of getting this done. But I think here, the big lesson is, and this is what I've always said, and I'm sure you said this, like when Trump got elected, a lot of people, even radicals, got very depressed, like, because it was like, oh, half the country is fascist or whatever. But I've always said, even before Trump, that most people don't vote, and most people don't vote because they're to the left of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Like, if you're
even
right,
if they don't have the political expression.
Yeah,
like,
they're not going to use the words. Yeah.
Yeah, they would never be like, I'm a socialist or I'm a communist or anything. But like, if you were to
express-
ask them, like, would you like a democratic workplace? They'd be like, where you get to work
Where
and
you own
you control
the
your
wealth.
own, control your own productive output. They'd be like, that makes total sense.
They will agree to the ideas, but not want the label.
Yeah, if you're to the right of the Republican Party, you're still voting Republican. So we can say that. And then a good number of the Democrats that voted Democrat are just holding their nose, and they are to the left of the Democratic Party as well. So most people are, if you looked at their politics, it would be defined as radical. It'd be defined as radical left. Now, they might not be involved in the actions that make them that, but that's what they believe. That. Yeah. And yeah, and that's a large part of what I do with my art is that, after that first album, it was all about, I'm putting these ideas out there. I don't care what words I'm using. I'm not talking to if you listen to my stuff, a lot of people said that our stuff wasn't political even in the 90s, because I wasn't talking to people that thought they were revolutionary. You have the exception like the guillotine and things like that. But a lot of my stuff was just talking to people where they're at. Now, with Mamdani, it proved that everybody wants, it proved how against Israel most people are, and how much people hate the genocide that's happening there. Yeah. So that's one thing. But it also proved that people want these ideas. People want a world. They want they might call it socialist. They might call it whatever. But they want this world that has been demonized. And so someone coming out and just being straight about that got people to vote that never would have voted before. Got people to vote that so that shows where that is. Now, I'm hoping, again, like I said, I haven't followed like what's been successful so far, but I think that is it is a launching point that has changed how people think about the world around them, right? And that is really important, because what I've seen happens is we might have these ideas about having this different world or about what we believe about it, but we mitigate what we think is possible based on what we think everyone else thinks, right? So all those people that went to work on Wall Street, they didn't think it could happen. They didn't think anybody would believe. They might have believed in some sort of vague thing like Rage talks about, and could have been won to a revolutionary party, but they didn't think it could happen, and that has to do with what they think everyone around them thinks. And so I think that there actually was a sea change that happened with that election, where a lot of people around the country were surprised that there would be people open to those politics. And so just from that standpoint alone, and I said that at the time, that would be a victory from people just saying, wow, someone that calls themselves a socialist and has these policies, has these ideas, wins. It changes what people think can happen all over the world. Yeah. So,
can we talk about what we mentioned briefly earlier? So your role is as an artist in this system, and obviously you don't just leave things at your art. You expand upon your ideas and your beliefs as you are now. But I wanted to discuss the kind of, the paradox of creating communist art in a capitalist system. I know there had been a little bit of noise when you were promoting Boosters about Annapurna's involvement. And look, Boosters is a $20 million budget. You intended this to be seen by as wide of an audience as you can, right? This is a film for normies, not somebody who's, read Engels and Marx. And this is, for a wide audience to be exposed to these ideas. So talking about, yes, you are making communist art in a capitalist system because capitalists have the money. Like that is who you get funding from.
And here's and just to, because I'm sure most of the people watching know what the noise is that you're talking about. So just to put it out there, like the nature of U.S. capital, the reason that Israel exists is so that U.S. hegemony can have a stakehold in that region. So when you're talking about hedge funds, when you're talking about huge capitalists, they've usually got a stake in as far as
in
investing.
Everything.
Investing in the infrastructure of Israel, investing in military weapons, things like that. It's so when you look at, for instance, the main stakeholders in everything, because we're talking about the entertainment industry, you're talking about the main stakeholders in all of these studios, things like that. There's a couple big ones. One is Vanguard, which is a fund that invests in things with capitalists. Another one is BlackRock. They are major stakeholders in Netflix, in every major theater chain, whether it's whether it's Cinemark, AMC, all of these things. Even before Ellison bought Warner Brothers and stuff, they were the major stakeholders there. And they, for instance, each of those have given something like $10 billion to the infrastructure of Israel. So, backing up, when we first signed to EMI, Wild Pitch EMI, EMI was this huge, and we're talking about 1992 when we signed it there. EMI was this huge corporation that had its hands everywhere, right? And because I've decided that what needs to happen is we need to create this mass militant radical labor movement in order to have a revolution. I never subscribed to the liberal idea that you get involved, that we just need better capitalists there, that we need to have
more
the better
women capitalists.
or we need to. My whole thing was it all has to go. So a lot of the times, we would always hear like all sorts of stories about this capitalist is the worst one, that capitalist is the worst one, because it hides the evils that the rest of the ruling class does. And that it's just normal, like when we did Sorry to Bother You, people kept being like, oh, it's about the tech industry. And I'm like, no, it's about capitalism itself. Like there's Steve Lifton, Sorry to Bother You, was not a tech person. He actually manufactured goods, right? So, coming out of being an actual revolutionary, I never had the sense that, oh, what I'm trying to do is figure out how to have collectives and work with something. No, I'm trying to get on the channels that everybody is on. When we had that almost hit, when we were on the radio in LA and in Chicago, it was almost certainly going to be played next to a Coca-Cola commercial.
Sure.
Right? It was almost, my point is I'm trying to get to the people that I can get to, that I can't get to on my own through slanging my tapes out of the trunk of my car, right? I'm trying to do that. So, but what's interesting is there's been a weird attack on this movie. And so I wanted to say that first about the general idea, like every movie that was out in the theater when ours came out had, was connected to more investment in, much more investment in Israel than ours. Matter of fact, our movie got attacked and Passenger didn't get attacked. Passenger is wholly owned by Larry Ellison, by Paramount Warner Brothers. I'm obviously not saying they should, but it's interesting that this is the movie that's about this, that has the attacks thrown against it. But not any of the hundreds of other TV shows that all these folks watch. I mean, I think, are we on YouTube right now?
No, we're
Amazon
so I was about to say,
Twitch.
this is Amazon owned Twitch,
Yeah.
and the reason why I'm smiling is because this is the exact same live attack that I hear all the time from people. Can I ask you a question?
Well, let's say this.
Or you have to finish your
YouTube
point.
gave $32 billion to cyber security for the IDF, right? And through facial recognition for the IDF, so they could recognize people and figure out how to bomb people in Gaza, right? And and so, but let's take it back real quick with the Annapurna thing. Annapurna bought Sorry to Bother You at Sundance Festival and put it out. That with this, I did a deal with them, and they developed the script with me. They paid me money, so I had time to write. Then I got Neon to finance the thing. So I don't want to. A lot of credit is being taken away from Neon. Neon financed the movie.
Mm-hmm.
The amount that Annapurna put in was less than 1% of the budget. Now, Annapurna, let's talk about, and this is only to talk about how weird the attacks are, because they're not attacking this stuff that is a lot more connected, but they're attacking this, and I think it's because of right-wing bots seeding these certain arguments against the movie because of what the movie says, and then people unwittingly taking them up because, so Annapurna was started by Megan Ellison. Megan Ellison got an inheritance years ago. It was all in all the newspapers. She got like $1 billion inheritance. Mm-hmm. With that, she did Annapurna. So the money doesn't go to Larry Ellison, but she did that. Either way, my point is, it's weird that even if you were going on the Larry Ellison thing, that you would be choosing this one as opposed to all the other ones, you know?
I think it is because you're one of the few, like, you know, you get a lot of that criticism because you are one of the few people doing what you do, and so that is directed at you in the same way that.
And the only reason I'm one of the few people doing what I'm willing to do, the only reason all these folks know about me, whether it's from the music or from Sorry to Bother You. I mean, Sorry to Bother You, they would have had more of an argument because it was fully
funded by Annapurna.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the people that, you know, fell into agreeing with that idea stated that they got radicalized by the movie Sorry to Bother You.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, 100%. So here's a couple things I want to say. One, Capital owns all methods of distribution. And we don't have the luxury of saying no to any method of distribution if our goal is to engage in agitated propaganda. That's number one. Yeah. Obviously, people will hear someone like yourself say this or someone like myself say this and go, well, you guys are successful and you're just trying to defend your success. And I think that comes from a place of cynicism only born out of your awareness of how impossible the forces of capital are to defeat. And I do think that there is this cynicism that breeds, this nihilism that breeds amongst people.
And that has to do with not having a class analysis. The only way we can defeat the capitalists is through having the working class overthrow the ruling class. There's no other little thing that happens that somehow makes them weaker or anything. And I purposely put myself on those channels. Like, you know, we're using Twitch. There's a bunch of other folks using YouTube. You could use some other thing. You could probably have your friend do something and you go on a website but it wouldn't get to the amount of people.
It doesn't.
But so that's why people use YouTube, Twitch. That's why we use all these.
Here's in all of my many years of doing this, when I was much poorer to having a lot more financial success overall, I think what I have seen is that people recognize how powerless they are overall in the face of these like unchangeable systems. And I think because of that, they sit around and want to criticize those who are ideologically closest to them because they feel like we will listen. Yeah. And we do listen because we want to hear constructive criticism from our closest associates, our closest ideological allies, and we are responsive to that. And that gives people a sense of power. Yeah. That gives a lot of powerless people a sense of power, and I think that's exactly where it comes from.
I think also, though, here's the thing, I don't think it's only cynicism. I think it's a misconception of power, right, as well. I think one of the longer critiques that I usually have is 20s and 30s, there was all of the there were a million card-carrying communists. There were like I said, demonstrations were, here's a bunch of people that will shut down your mines. Here's a bunch of people that will shut down the steel industry. Here's a blah, blah, blah. There was a united front against fascism, in which the biggest radical organization in the world, in order to get the U.S. to fight Hitler, they went underground, but when the war was over, people were still underground. So all of a sudden, these folks weren't communists anymore. They had been open, many of them, but they were progressive. And so then you were able to have the House Un-American Activity Committee come in the 50s and be like, look at all these people that are saying they're progressive. They're really communists.
Yeah.
And they had been hiding, whereas had it been 15 years before, people would be like, I know they're communists. They told me they were communists when they brought all these people to help me not get evicted, right?
Yeah.
So then you had a breakup of the biggest the biggest radical organization in the United States, with however many members. They broke up over those sorts of attacks, but also over their unresolved feeling like the critiques of Stalin weren't handled well. Now, they broke up and they formed a bunch of different little organizations that became the New Left. One of those organizations was Progressive Labor Party, which I later, 20, 30 years later, joined. And the New Left had a different take on it. They were like, fuck that, we're revolutionaries. Fuck that, we're radicals. But they stopped organizing on the job. And I'm speaking in generalizations and leaving out a lot of shit. They stopped organizing on the job and moved to universities and cities only, and left all these places behind, where in the 20s and 30s, places like Utah, Montana, these were hotbeds of communist activity. Alabama, right? Hotbeds of communist activity. All of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but through this time, it then became about students. And for the first time, in the 60s, you heard the students are the revolution, the youth are the revolution. That had not been historically accurate. The only time that was accurate was contemporaneously in China with the
Red Guards. Cultural Revolution.
Cultural Revolution. So, so that made everything be about spectacle, because you can have a strike at a university, but it's not the same as a strike at a factory. And so it became about spectacle. Now, because of that, you had a lot of radicals that were in a movement that was about spectacle. And if you're at a university, the thing you're going to do is become a professor, right? You're going to write books, and you're going to be, you might be radical, but your whole thing is, I need to write a book that says something different than this other book said. And it's not based on actual practice. It's not based on where are people at and how do we deal. And so you have all these things developing. At the same time, you had this nonprofit complex that came up since the 40s that was guiding what was thought of as left. And in order to, as they stated, keep the politics inside. So out of that, one thing you started seeing happening was, instead of strikes, boycotts, right? Now, in some things, some cases, boycotts can be effective.
Yeah, but it shifted from production to consumption.
Yeah, and so we have all of these ideas out there that are moving the power base away from the point of exploitation, which is on the job, to this idea that it has to do with this other thing of who you're involved in. Like, I put a statement on one time of being like, well, if somebody decides to go work for Boeing in order to organize the workers there, then they are working with an evil corporation in order to organize. And somebody was like, oh, see, Boots would take a job at Boeing, or Boots thinks it's okay to take a, and so a lot of that is also sort of more of a, and I want to be clear, because there are some communist anarchists, but then there are also some more libertarian anarchists. And this sort of idea that kind of came out of the 80s with the punk scene that was very much against class struggle, against what actual class struggle was. And we have all of these ideas that has led to confusion about what, because some things are interesting projects, like people would go make communes and be like, we're gonna live collectively, or we're gonna do a prefigurative thing, and we're doing this way. And that's interesting as a way to talk, but it's not, doesn't build the movement that we need. So when we're talking about all this stuff, and so then you have all these sort of liberal things. Slavoj Žižek talks about it a lot, like where you could go and you could buy a Starbucks thing and it says, you know, made from fair trade coffee, and you feel like that's better than this other thing, and you feel like you're doing something. So we have this politic that has moved us away from actual class struggle into a liberal politic that says that, you know, hey, if you use Hulu instead of Netflix, then you're doing better, you know, or something like that. And it's also because we don't have a movement that people can plug into. So you got to subscribe to some idea that says you can do something about things. And because we don't have that mass militant radical labor movement, and the parties that are forming it, people subscribe to these ideas of the lesser evil in capitalism. And
I think I'm a Virgo, really, you know, I appreciate how it explored corporate saviorhood and like the performativeness of corporations. And I think you're right. And overall, looking at the cultural scene, it does really feel as if there has been an overall chill, not just from Trump's second administration, but when you look at artists in the 60s, you know, from Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, to filmmakers like Jean-Luc Godard, they were much more explicit in their Marxist, Leninist, communist ideas that they were putting into their art. So I feel like there is the fact that, excuse me, but One Battle After Another being the biggest film of the year, people holding that up as like a revolutionary movie. No, it wasn't, in my opinion. But I think it
was a good movie, though, to be fair. I liked it. Its politics
we don't need to get into that film on this.
Okay, look, all I'm saying is it was fun to watch.
Definitely.
Yeah. But the politics of it, yes, left much to be desired.
It's interesting because since I'm such a PTA fan, I read the book first, I didn't finish the book, but I was trying to, because it's a long book.
Yeah.
But I started getting worried because the book is way more right-wing than the movie. And so I see what he did there. In the book, everybody's a snitch. Every hero, either you're supposed to relate to the snitches. And it's just more, and the book is actually a critique of the Weather Underground. And a lot of the Weather Underground folks are my friends, and I even wrote the foreword on one of their books, but I'm always clear about my critique being a similar critique that the book had about the Weather Underground. And so, but the writer of the book is a lot, you know, is just like nothing matters. It's, you know, whatever, it's all that. And he, you know, the book also has like UFOs and Godzilla and all that kind of stuff. And it's more like Kill Bill than the movie is. Now, what I see that he did differently there was take that critique and make it be more recent, which doesn't really, because I'll say this, the Black Panthers had that same critique of the Weather Underground, right? A lot of revolutionaries had that same critique. So, you know, there's a lot of things, and I think there were things. Anyway, there could be a whole podcast show on that.
No, I mean,
but there were things that I liked about a lot of things that I liked about it. But I see how the transposing of the time and the changing of the main character to be the daughter to being black and that changed the politics of it.
Yeah. What did you think? Did you watch Eddington?
Yeah.
What did you think about Eddington and its politics as opposed to
just on the politics? I think there's a lot of things that, and I'm an Ari Aster fan in general, but I think just the sort of nihilism that is in everything, and that becomes kind of supposedly smart, you know, right? And
I will say, the one thing though with the data centers was what really stuck out to me, how the film opens and ends, and it's like, hey, tech, big tech. Like, as we're all sitting here arguing, big tech
but it's kind of like says you can't do anything about it. That's its point of view.
Because
like it doesn't matter however you do.
I think the through line here is that neither of these works have any Marxist-Leninism baked into them as an alternative or as a solution.
And that's our fault. I would say. This is what I always say, is because
discipline and
there's
organizing.
always been critiques of hip hop that people will have, revolutionaries will have, blah blah blah, and I'll be like, look, if we make that movement, and I keep summing it up as a mass militant radical labor movement, if we make that, we create the artists. We're having artists that are created in a world where there wasn't a movement that shaped their politics, right? Where we and I always blame it on radical movements because I always say that we ran away from class struggle for 50, 60 years. And I will say that it's different now. I'm seeing that a huge change happen in that. And that's what creates the artist.
Did you watch No Other Choice? Park Chan-wook's film from last year.
I'm trying to remember which one that is. Is it like
it's
a bunch of people? Yeah.
So
somebody
he works at a paper center. He was working there for 25 years. He gets fired.
Yeah, I didn't see that. I started watching.
It's great. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. That was one of my favorites of last year, and I think a lot of maybe what people were looking for in Eddington or One Battle, I found, in No Other Choice, with commentary on not just the new tech era that's being forced upon us, which I also would love to talk to you about, because we got Marty Scorsese out here, investing in AI companies. It feels like things changed from when we were striking a few years ago, and AI was a major concern, which it still is. And a lot of people who were saying, fuck big tech, fuck these techno-fascists. And now there's been such a change of tune.
Well, I'll say one thing that I did see happening at the time is this idea of experts. And you see it in all sorts of walks of life. So when we were having the WGA strike, and where it was like, we're going against the tech companies, we're putting in a demand against AI, there was a lot of people going around saying, well, we should really be talking to the experts. And who are the experts? OpenAI. I'm seriously, like, people were like, let's talk to this person from OpenAI, let's talk to that person, because they're actually critical of AI, and we should be talking to them, because if you're not one of them, then Boots, you don't know what you're talking about. Right. So I think a lot of people got swayed between now and then. There was a lot of work. A lot of times when we think about these movements that we're creating, we forget about the fact that there's counter movement happening, and that people are organizing against these things, and that the continuing motion is the only way, the only hope we have against that. Because, people get organized onto the other side.
And you know what? It was Daniel Kwan, I think, who said, we might not know tech, but we know art and the industry that we work in. And I think essentially what's very frustrating is seeing this just total bending down. So many filmmakers, auteurs, creatives who keep repeating the same script of like, well, it's here, nothing we can do, it's the future. If you can't beat it, join it, rather than any opposition, or even just a, hey,
I mean,
hold
a few
on
years
second.
ago it was NFT, right?
Oh,
Right,
God.
right.
It was,
So it's
I know.
it was,
So
it was
a lot
like,
of the same people who were talking NFTs
Yeah.
who are now using the same script for AI.
Yeah, and look, I was around in making music and in the Bay Area when the first .com boom happened, and it was all people scamming. It was all people scamming with this air of expertise. And matter of fact, you know, our fourth album, Party Music, came out on one of these the nichemusic.com, and then it got sold to Warner Brothers. But it was they were just using money, and everybody was like, "Oh, you're not smart if you're not dealing with the experts." Same thing with 2008, the crash. Before that, you had all these people talking down specifically to black folks, saying, "Hey, if you're not what they say, economically literate, or you're not you know, you're not financially literate if you're not buying a house." And when I would speak out about it, I would speak out about it publicly, and I'd be told that I wasn't an expert. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. And all of those people are the ones that were getting people to buy houses in that whole market. So we have all of this happening, and that's one of the games, is to be like the experts say, and that it's inevitable, and that's the way that things are. But we see this all the time, and it's like our memories are shortened because we're gaslighted into being like, this is a new situation that has no connection to all this other stuff. I'll tell you what, I've had people come up to me and say, for instance, that they were on the crew that made those Google VO commercials, and that they shot all that shit. The commercial where they're like, it's interesting that I'm not a real person, that no real persons were used in this, that they actually shot that stuff and they had to sign NDAs for that. It's the same kind of scamming that was going in that first .com boom. They've just figured out how to pass the ball. It's the pyramid scheme, but they figured out how to keep it going. And they got $1 trillion in it, and they can get more investment if they can just keep the lie going.
Yeah.
No,
it's one scam after another that they build on, and then once it's burned, like the NFTs were, no one even thinks about it any longer, and they move on to the next thing. That's just straight up what it is. I mean, a lot of these AI companies like literally hire laborers in the third world in developing nations to actually monitor and drive these vehicles, for example, for pennies on the dollar, and then they present it as this like this profound accomplishment, when in fact it's just, I guess, the new technology is allowing new methods of exploitation.
And actually, it's not that new. It's just it's allowing us to dream about some other world and not see the exploitation that's happening. So yeah.
I want to ask you about, what you have planned next, because obviously all your work from music to film, it's all rooted in your communist ideology. But I think looking at Sorry to Bother You, I'm a Virgo, and now I Love Boosters, it seems as if you kind of have a specific approach to like one particular mechanism or industry. With Sorry to Bother You, it's the telemarketing industry, which I was also a telemarketer. Evil shit.
Yeah.
Boosters, which is about the fast fashion and haute couture and stealing from.
But then also the tie into I think the NGOs as well.
Yeah.
Which I thought was very cool. Like the angle of it being the democratic.
Well, it's funny because because I think some of those real people are coming after me right now.
Yeah, I was about to say, you do rip quite a bit into something that I'm very critical of, that liberals also despise whenever I bring it up, which is like the ways in which liberal groups or like Democratic Party aligned groups will actively try to harness some kind of revolutionary movement or present themselves as like changing the world in a meaningful way, when in fact what they're doing is trying to engage in social conditioning and manipulate as many people as possible.
And so here's the thing. I do have that in there, but ultimately I try to get to the class struggle because when I was in a PLP, sometimes there would be people that we thought were right, and what do you do in that situation? And what I learned that they did was like, okay,
turns out they
we
were
need to-
anarchists.
no, we'd be like, okay, this, and it'd be based on the things that they're doing. But it'd be like, okay, we think this person is a cop. Let's have them sweep the floor instead. This is what you're going to be passing out flyers. So the idea is you got to keep moving. You can't be like just paranoid about this might happen, that might happen, this person's working against me. You got to assume that they're working against you. And you have to be working on the thing that actually changes the whole thing. You have to be organizing, because only when we're not actually organizing is that, well, when we're not actually organizing, that those sorts of tactics are more effective. But if you have a connection to your base, if you know people, if you can walk outside and you've spent time organizing your neighbors into something, organizing your co-workers into something where they know who you are, and not just talking to them about politics, but what we would call base building, like hanging out. Those are your friends, and you work with them, then it's harder for them to do stuff. So when folks come after me, there's enough people that like know really what I'm about because they've worked with me in real life or seen what I'm doing. And so I worry a little bit about that part of my work where, like, that you just pointed out, where we're like, it's kind of like there's a little paranoia in there, because there's paranoia in real life when we're doing it. But I try to push it through to, we have to organize and build class struggle. And that's the only thing that's going to solve it. It's not going to be like uncovering, like, him uncovering the plan and sorry to bother you did nothing, right? But the only thing that was doing something was building for this class.
Caroline, I want you to finish your thought because I interrupted you rudely because I'm a misogynist. But
Well, I was just asking if you had anything planned next, if there's, you just tackled the fast fashion industry and, corporate theft, of course, which is all a part, which is capitalism. What are you working on right now or coming up?
So, I already sold 2 scripts that I'm supposed to be doing. And then I sold an idea that I'm writing. So that's what's in the work. I don't want to say what they are, but
no spoilers.
But that's what's happening. I mean, there's a little, what's good about this, to be upfront with I Love Boosters. We got kind of thwarted at the gate. We got all our screens were less than half of what we needed to be. The social media spend on ads, they were seeing they weren't actually getting out in the same way their other movies stuff got out. So it was getting muted.
Relentlessly also marketing, being
but
online,
it does
trying to
still kind of
promote.
go to some of the same people. So it's so anyway, this movie is not it's not a blockbuster hit, but it's still, we're at about 10 million right now. And it's gonna, once it goes internationally, we'll do more, all that kind of stuff. So it's a slog to do it, but it also means some of my ideas that might have taken more of a budget, now it's kind of looked at like, okay, this is the budget range. And so all that is just more confines to work with, and sometimes that makes for great ideas. So for instance, with I Love Boosters, a lot of it should have been a much more expensive movie. And one of the reasons it looks so awesome has to do with us figuring out how to make the few shots that we have work and look awesome. So, you have
to get creative with the creative
So,
elements.
I have one question for you that perhaps might be somewhat controversial, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What's your perspective on socialism with Chinese characteristics? Because I did see labor exploitation being prominently featured not only in the United States, but also in China as well. And there's a real element of that, which was still tied back to, which was still, of
Well,
course,
if you
tied
s-
back to American
Yeah,
capital.
if you see, yeah, exactly. It's workers of the world against the U.S. capitalists right there. And if you see in the movie, the factory owners stole the device. This is whatever.
Spoilers. You're spoiling it.
This factory owner stole the device from the Chinese government, and there is a line between the factory owners and the Chinese government. And I do, look, if you listen to my music, I talk about Mao and those ideas a lot, and yeah, exactly. The East is red, and look, so it is a way to talk about how workers in China and workers in the U.S. have more in common with each other than they do with the billionaires of the U.S., right? And I don't think that you could look at the movie in an anti-China way, and that's definitely not the ideas that I had in there. And yeah, and so we have, and there in real life there is a conflict between the Communist Party of China and the Chinese business owners that are there.
Well, do you believe that China is still maintaining a dictatorship of the proletariat?
Well, here's what I would say. So a lot of people will. There was a interesting part of that discussion when the Annapurna thing came up, which was, is Boots Riley making communist art? And my answer is, I don't give a fuck. What I don't care what you call it.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to make is something that gets people to want to make a revolution.
Would
Right?
you say? Would you
And-
say
and
black cat, white cat, as long as it catches the rat?
Oh, I don't know. Is that what? Because
It's-
one of my
it's-
favorite.
it's Deng
one-
Xiaoping said
Okay, yeah, I don't know that one. Yeah, no, I would. Here's the thing. We could talk about the disagreements of the way China went and I have there's a critique that I have that and here's the truth. A lot of what folks in Tiananmen Square were protesting for was to be able to be managers of sweatshops, right? So that was a real conflict that was happening there. They put it as freedom and democracy, but the specifics of the reforms that they were asking for were those things. So there's conflict, but that doesn't mean. I mean, I would say this: that in China they're way more free than we are right now. You have even some of the lapdogs of anti-China propaganda, like what's that artist Ai Weiwei,
Well,
even admitting now that the U.S. censors way more than China does.
He's back now. He's on the Chinese side now.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm saying. So the thing is they have healthcare, they have housing. If you look at when you see the China, and there was a struggle around that just because certain people have ideas of what does housing look like in China. Now, I happen to subscribe to all the Instagram things where they're like, let me show you my house. And then, that. So I was like, no, this is like, they've got an apartment, so in the sense that I think we see we see that there is exploitation of those workers because they're in a capitalist exchange with the U.S. fashion designer that exists, but they're not in squalor. The question is, and the same thing with us. We might not be in squalor, but we have a struggle to be had over the wealth that our labor creates and the power that comes from that. The power So, and when I say our, I'm not in the working class anymore. I'm used to speaking from that term, but I'm saying the U.S. working class. But now, so yeah, I think that there are a lot of things happening in China that have to do with them trying to survive in a world that's launching imperialist attacks at them. And similarly, what are they getting for their people, and where's the road that they're going to? That's really the question, rather than what is it labeled as. You could be like, technically it's this and it's that.
Have you been?
I don't really care. No, I've only been to Hong Kong.
We just recently went, and it was an incredible experience. I mean, it is a lot of, it was a really interesting moment for me, because it's a lot of my commentary obviously revolves around anti-imperialism, and I talk extensively about like the ways in which Americans are propagandized about like everyday Chinese existence, and what the Chinese Communist Party, the Communist Party of China, represents, and seeing that in real time is truly, it was a profound experience, I would say.
And one of the reasons that,
I'd recommend it.
China is picked in the film that is because that where we are is we need to know that we have that I could have picked another Asian country or something like that, but it's more that in the sense that we do talk about heightening the conflict and accelerating the situation, that comes from us having a knowledge that there needs to be solidarity between them.
Yeah.
I don't know how involved you are in the casting, but I love Poppy, who's amazing. I also had read that you were one of the first people who reached out to Melissa Barrera after she faced consequences for speaking out early for Palestine. You offered her a role in Boosters. What is kind of your process in working with people, and now 2 films that you've done in a series? Are you drawn to people, or is it kind of a necessity that you align with them, that they understand fundamentally what you're trying to do? And you've worked with Lakeith now twice.
I think people obviously they have to be down, and it's not like and they have to be at various levels. I mean, doing music, you'll see all the people I've done songs with. Most of them would not call themselves a communist or even a socialist at all. And, but there has to be some mutual respect there. And I've never, so I don't only work with people that have that same viewpoint. But that being said, for someone to be involved with my work, there's a lot of places they could go to get a lot more hype around in their career. So they're making a choice when they get involved with the Boots Riley project, and part of that choice is, at the very least, I see what he means, and I think that's a good thing. They may not want to take that into their own life and do something with it, but they're exploring, they're interested in that. So I, and really I have to make it work. I mean, I think it's great that Poppy has a lot of similar ideas as I do, but it also wouldn't have worked if she wasn't just an amazing actor, right? It would, so I have to,
I will say though, I don't even necessarily know though if, sure, Kiki Palmer, Demi Moore, these are people who are not short on work, but there are definitely people who you have in your cast who have been blacklisted for speaking out on Palestine, who I know, either reading interviews with them or just understanding the state of Hollywood, are not getting as much work because of their politics and because of the movements that they are publicly expressing support for. So I do feel like a Boots Riley vehicle is kind of one of the rare opportunities in Hollywood to be a person who is outspoken, who's not afraid to stand up to the Zionist machine, but may then be facing issues with getting opportunities. So you're kind of a rare haven for that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I don't work that fast, so it really
You
is
gotta
not
make
an
more-
answer.
So
It's not really an
basically,
answer,
you gotta make more Yeah.
But I think, yeah, the other thing that I'm seeing is, there's still a lot of pushback for this work, and because there's this veneer that there is no censorship, it happens in different ways.